Welcome to Fintech Daydreaming, the podcast that dives into the world of banking technologies and the ever-changing landscape of fintech companies. We bring you real-life examples from global and local thought leaders, as well as experts working within the financial industry, and seek out the best stories from the front lines of financial services innovation, where dreams of industry pioneers meet reality. Hosted by Paul Krogdahl and Ville Sontu. This is Fintech Daydreaming.
It's 2026. We are back. We are kicking off a new season of Fintech Daydreaming. And as I think we did for the last season, I need to go back and double check because I might be wrong here. So let me check later. But I think we started off last season with an episode of Nordic Fintech highlights. If we didn't, then shame on me because I didn't double check. But we are starting off this season anyway with an episode of Nordic Fintech highlights. And we are bringing to you what was hot, interesting, exciting, and potentially dull in the world of fintech and banking technology during December of 2025. It's always interesting when you have to jump between years in the middle of one episode, but bear with us. There will be some discussions of 2026 and some looks back at December of 2025. But as is always the case, I can't do this alone. I am Paul Krogdahl. I will be your host for this episode. But I do this, as always, with my fantastically good friend Ville. So Ville, how are you for this cold January?
No, I am good. The tradition, as the tradition goes, doing a dry January as well. So my body is feeling good. My ordering is telling me fantastic things about my health right now. So again, technically, statistically, I'm feeling fantastic, and I think I can share the sentiment from a personal perspective as well. The one thing that I just realized now that when you did the introduction is that we usually do this end of season kind of a wrap up episode, but we didn't do that last season because we kind of crash landed into the end of the year because we had so much content, and we had the banking conference, which we reported with a very, very long episode as well, but we never got to kind of round up 25. Do you think we should do that?
Yes, but no, but yes. I fear that we don't want to overload this episode. Unless Janne turns around and says, nothing happened at all in December. We've got no content, nothing to talk about. Oh, dearie me, let's imagine something very quickly. But I've seen the list of what happened in December. So I think maybe we'll do a special extra episode at some point in time where Ville, you and I can sit down, have a delayed Christmas beer, and just talk about the end of 2025
Yeah,
I think that's probably.
and maybe do predictions for 26. That way we can reflect back on how wrong we were about all our predictions. So that's a classic as well.
We could do that, but my prediction is that I never do predictions. So let's see how all of that pans out. But like I said, Nordic Fintech highlight. We wouldn't do this without Janne. So Janne, how are you? Did you have a fantastic Christmas?
Yes, very excited to be back here, and yeah, had a small Christmas break as well, and now back to work as usual.
Wonderful, fantastic. I would like to say I had a smooth, gentle, relaxed Christmas. But as some might know and might have seen on LinkedIn, I had the pleasure of accepting a new role where I worked during my day job in the middle of December. And stepping into that role, I suddenly took upon me a huge chunk of catch up and other activities. So I spent the whole of the holiday season glued to my iPad, glued to additional extra team calls and everything else. And I'm still looking forward to having a relaxing Christmas. But I fear that's now going to be at the end of this year rather than a catch up of what's just been. But with that in mind, Janne, what did happen in December around the Nordic Fintech? Was there anything exciting, anything cool? Was there a lot of activity, or did all the fintech world calm down for a beautiful Yuletide with their loved ones?
Yeah, apparently fintech world did have some relaxing Christmas as well. So there wasn't happening too much on the latter part of the month, but still quite a few interesting news in December. Funding wise, it was a bit more quiet in Sweden. Xaver raised quite a major round, But then what was very active was the M&A space, so especially a lot of acquisitions in the market, and I think it's kind of continuing the trend that the market is consolidating a bit, and there will be, you know, less but bigger players. We can dig into those today also. Partnership wise, yes, companies are renewing their technologies when it comes to RegTech, KYC, payment solutions. So that's always trending, and also banks of course working with their legacy stuff, but then again more and more discussion about what's going to be in the new era, like the CBDCs and so on, and maybe we can also touch upon those a little bit. But overall, you know, pretty basic stuff. If I would have to wrap up the entire year, so I wouldn't say there was anything too surprising, but still, of course, hundreds of news in the Nordic fintech space throughout the year, and things are definitely moving forward, but maybe nothing too dramatic that we couldn't have necessarily predicted.
I like it. And with that, you saying banks focusing on their legacy and all the new stuff coming, that gives me a perfect opportunity to just promote my book that's coming out this year called Rip Out the Core. So thank you for that one, Janne. I will find every opportunity in all of our episodes going forwards now to promote my book coming out hopefully soon. But one of the things that I'm considering here, Janne, with so potentially little activity in December, is this normal? Is this part of the trends that we've seen in the past, or has this been unique for 2025?
No, I mean, I think it goes a little bit in cycles, and there are, you know, some more quiet periods, like usually August, and then at the end of the year. So nothing too strange here. Quite the usual stuff, yeah.
What do you think, Ville? You sit on the other side of the table from me, although I'm now straddling the table in an awkward way. But what's the view from you from the banking side for December and the activities that we had?
Well, traditionally, the December for banks is a time where you start nothing new. So again, what you do is you basically shut down, get ready for the Christmas shopping season, especially with the payment systems, and nothing really new happens. It's also linked to the fact that a lot of the kind of annual cycle of processes and funding and budgets ends in December, so you rarely do any radical moves from the banking side, at least. And I think that's also reflected in the news. We saw some things happening, of course, but not as much as you would expect on a normal month, especially during 25, when there was so much activity in different areas of the fintech world. So yeah, I think it's not surprising. I think December is one of those months where if you do see news from banks, it's mostly related to the fact that they have some leftover budget that they absolutely need to spend before the end of the year. And this year, I think the calculations were correct to the extent that we didn't see any surprising moves from the bank side, at least. So yeah, again, not surprised. But again, that also means that once the quote unquote doors open, now in January, we're going to see a flurry of activities, and I think our next update for the Nordic Fintech highlights is going to be a very different one.
I agree with you. I think it's going to be. At the same time, I sit and wonder, particularly here in Finland, about the interesting situation we're in with the economy and other related activities around that, whether that's going to have a interesting effect on the bank and the fintech community, specifically in Finland. This is a very Finnish area. Any thoughts on that, Janne?
Yeah, I mean, at least when we talk about Finland and the economy, I think it's a bit unfortunate how everything, you know, seems to be like kind of frozen for or we just wait the good news to happen and stuff like that. Of course, if we go more into the tech field and into the fintech field, so there's a bunch of more activities, but yeah, I'm still quite positive now with AI and technology that we will also see a bit more stuff now in the Nordics coming up, and especially Sweden. Sweden has always been the kind of, I don't know, the most positive country, especially when it comes to tech development.
Well, what is always the case for us when we review the headlines from the previous month on the Nordic Fintech highlights is that we take one article each that we pull out that we want to do a little bit of a deep dive on, something that we found interesting from the latest newsletter from Helsinki Fintech Farm. And if you haven't registered yet to that newsletter, then we will put a link in the descriptions, or you can find it by Googling Helsinki Fintech Farm. And Janne and his guys do a great job in putting together the newsletter that summarizes what's been happening the previous month and sending it out. And that's what we use to get our news stories as well. Going with that, maybe we start with you this time, Ville, to kick off. What news article did you pick up from the newsletter that you thought were interesting to do a deep dive into?
There are not, like we said, there's not too many articles. I mean, I think we really picked the three top ones. I always go back to my usual go-to, which is my favorite thing in the world, or my most interesting thing in the world to me right now, which is the digital euro. And the news article that I picked is the fact that ECB is now staffing up their team working on the digital euro. They already have hired more than 100 people working mostly in Frankfurt in the ECB tower to work on the digital euro. And now they have opened up 6 mostly execution and project management related positions in the team. And these are all senior positions as well. So they are really ramping up to the next stage of the project. That news in itself might not be that interesting, but it's linked to many other interesting themes around the digital euro. The reason why these roles are actually quite operational and deployment related is the fact that ECB is getting ready to launch their pilot project with the digital euro. They said earlier in 25, they said that when they concluded the previous phase in the development of the digital euro, they said that they are looking to launch a pilot of the digital euro, which would be live by the end of 27. As of today, we're recording on the 12th of January. We don't have details of that pilot, but due to the timeline of this pilot, they need to again be ready for that, and these roles are linked to the pilot. The pilot itself, what we know so far is that they are going to do a very closed, limited pilot on the digital euro, again, having end of 27 to get it live. And they will involve a limited amount of financial institutions to take part in the pilot. They have announced a public session on the 15th of January, so later this week they will probably share more about the scope of the pilot and what is expected from the participating institutions who would like to participate in the pilot. Interesting to see. So again, there's been a lot of discussion about the cost of developing the digital euro based on the existing specification by the banks and the other intermediaries or payment service providers in the Eurozone. And the ECB has very publicly disagreed to the high cost of developing the intermediary parts of the digital euro based on their report that they also released towards the end of 25. And I think this pilot will surface a lot of those tensions as well. So it's going to be very interesting to see who will be participating in this pilot and what is being provided by the ECB and what will be the structure of cost when it comes to developing even the smaller scope, presumably, of the pilot of the digital euro. So interesting to see again how this will play out, which institutions will take part, and how this will be developed. Also good to say that as part of the news that was linked to this, they said that the ECB is estimating that the development of the digital euro, the ECB parts of the digital euro, is 1.3 billion euros up until the launch of the digital euro, which is perceived to be in 2030. The subsequent operating costs are estimated to be 320 million per year for the ECB parts of this solution. Always good to remember, this excludes the development and operational cost of the intermediaries, i.e. the banks and the PSPs. So what's going to be the invoice in the end for the European citizens remains to be seen. There's also political pressure from the European Parliament to change some aspects of the scope of the digital euro, which would also impact the cost. But all of this to say that it's safe to say that 26 is going to be a very critical year for the digital euro, and we will see interesting news moving forward here as well. And I expect that we will be talking about this in the podcast as well many times during this year.
Oh, we will definitely be talking about this more. You and I tend to have a tendency of bringing up the discussion of digital euro, stable coins, cryptocurrencies, all of the above in both positive and negative views. I think we can both say that we stand on the fence when it comes to digital euro. There is good things, there's bad things, and it's difficult to prevent it from becoming almost a political rampage as you continue this discussion. And I'm sure every time we bring it up, it will end up being almost political, with people religiously standing on each side of the fence on this to try and argue the good and bad things. I can see both the good and the bad. I can see a lot of benefits with the digital euro, but I can also see why some people are skeptical about it and worried about where it's going. I think this pilot phase is probably a good way of starting to bring some of that out, but I still think that there's a big area of public awareness and public education that still has to happen, where we start to get rid of some of these falsified premonitions or positions of the digital euro, which are being driven by people either inadvertently or by people on purpose to try and derail the process that's ongoing. So from my perspective, I think this is a very positive piece of news. I'm really looking forward to seeing this pilot being executed, although if they are starting the pilot discussions now, then the actual pilot is definitely at least a year ahead, or maybe a little bit further. But the other interesting part from what you brought up is the fact that they have hired over 100 people. This is starting to look more and more like the discussion is going from will this happen or not to when will this happen. There seems to be almost a level of positivityness. Is that even an English word? A positiveness with the inside of the ECB that it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. When you talk to people from the ECB around this project, it seems to be an inevitability. And I think there's not going to be any pushback from the ECB side, obviously, for the current scope of the digital euro. And when I mentioned, for example, the political conversations that are happening in the parliament right now, the reason why it's on critical path for the ECB and the digital euro in general is the fact that the rapporteur, so the person who is preparing the conversation and driving the conversation in the parliament, Navarrete has made a report towards the end of 25, and I think we discussed this a little bit in the podcast as well earlier, which is suggesting that the ECB should only focus on the so-called offline part of the digital euro and basically let the private sector solve the online part of the digital euro scope with solutions like we have like Vipps Mobile Pay, we have Siirto in Finland, we have Swish in Sweden. So again, private solutions like that, and of course Bizum in Spain is the kind of the poster child of this private sector person-to-person payment movement, and that is against what the ECB says. The ECB says that the digital euro cannot happen without the online component, and again, it's interesting to see how they will reconcile this kind of a misalignment in their expectations. One interesting and final bit, maybe a slightly nerdy bit, but still very interesting in my mind, is the fact that in the Navarrete report, he says that the offline digital euro should also work in online payments, i.e. in e-commerce and internet payments. Nobody knows how that could work, even theoretically, from a technical perspective. So again, it's going to be an interesting to see how all these kind of expectations are going to be reconciled on the political landscape. But yeah, again, interesting year ahead.
Well, being the nerds that we are, we actually sat one evening over the Christmas period discussing in detail this whole offline capability. And I have to admit, I'm still really scratching my head about this. This comes back to your famous quote of "Tell me why." There is elements of the offline for the digital euro that I'm struggling a little bit with, but it'll be interesting to see how this all pans out. But how about you, Janne? Are you a nerd focused in on understanding the offline capabilities of the digital euro, or have you put this all into a locked cupboard and said, I believe in crypto?
Maybe none of those, but yeah, honestly, now when you brought up the political discussion and everything, so yeah, I think it's pretty clear that the certain people, the officials, are have clearly having the opinion that it's going to happen, and we don't need to kind of ask for permissions or kind of have the public opinion. But then again, now it would be actually fun to talk with, ordinary people completely outside of the banking and payments industry, and then, just ask them about, what do they even know about this, and what's their thought, and probably like, are they afraid of it, or positive, or do they not give a damn, or how does it work? But it's absolutely a big thing when it's going to happen, but then, like, what do actually normal people think? That's interesting.
I think in some cases we're getting actually quite a lot of input on what the general people on the street are thinking, but a lot of it is overcast by misinformation to a certain degree. So I think I agree with you 100%, Janne. There is a need to listen to the general person on the street. But I also think there's a critical need to educate the general person on the street as to what this really is, why the ECB really believes that it is relevant. And it comes down to this. In actual fact, when I talk to a lot of people, very few people really understand the difference between public and private money. And unless you can get that on the table and get them to understand the difference of the liability between the two and what it really means to you as an individual, it's very difficult to have that discussion as to whether the digital euro is relevant or not, because it always ends up in a discussion of surveillance. The minute you get the digital euro, the ECB can turn off your account and stop you spending your money. Theoretically, that is a dramatical way of looking upon it. Honestly, they can actually do that already today. So there's a mix here. And Ville, we've had this discussion multiple times as well. So before we move on, do you want to make a final comment on that?
I think the privacy aspect is a bit overstated, like you said. The ECB and the regulators, they can already do everything that they are afraid of. So the step from the digital euro is a step towards more resilient and more private solution than anything that exists today. So that's why I think it's a little bit misplaced criticism of the digital euro to talk about the privacy factors or the big brother is watching you kind of components, because again, this is just an improvement if you really are worried about those things rather than a decline in these aspects. But I think like you pointed out, the real question is that, do people really need public money in the online world? And most people shouldn't and don't care. And how will then that value proposition be translated into motivations to actually develop the digital euro is going to be the focal point of the conversation this year.
Absolutely. We're going to move on, but I am convinced that a lot of our listeners have got a point of view here, or questions or thoughts. Put them in the comment. Let's continue the discussion afterwards. And maybe Ville and I will pick up some of your questions in a future episode. We might do a question answer episode around the digital euro, because as this continues moving forward, it's going to become more and more of a critical discussion point. Yes, we're still going to hear about stablecoin. We're still going to hear about generative AI, but particularly here in Europe, I think we're going to start seeing more and more discussions around the digital euro. So more of that will come up on next episodes. But moving on, let's move to the next news article. Janne, what did you pick up as being exciting and interesting for you this time?
Yes, so there was one very interesting transaction in Sweden. So there is a company called DBT. It's a company focused on financing or specifically lending to growth companies and SMEs. It's some sort of an alternative to equity funding and kind of a neobank for for SMEs, and they just got acquired. And the buyer is NOBA, which it's a Swedish digital banking group actually. So they are behind some of the quite well-known brands like Nordic Bank or Bank Norwegian and Svensk Hypotekspension. So that's a quite significant digital banking group from Sweden, and now they are obviously growing their portfolio quite significantly by acquiring DBT. The price for the transaction was 403 million svenska kronor, and the loan portfolio is worth 1.1 billion kronas as well. So it's I think there's potential. I think because NOBA Group is something I'm very keen on following, because they're not really like a traditional bank, but neither they are very much of a startup. So they have actually done already quite significant stuff. And now when they get possession of the DBT, so I'm really looking forward what's going to happen there. And also, as we know, the SME funding space is the one what everyone keeps on nagging about, how difficult it's to get funding for SMEs, and so there's obviously a lot of potential there.
Very interesting news. I have to admit, I haven't had time to read into detail into the background of the acquisition, but two things strike me very quickly. The first one is, like you said at the beginning, we're starting to see a continued growth of merger and acquisitions. And I think that's been driven to a certain degree by the economical situation that we've got globally, the geopolitical situation and everything else. The smaller players are maybe struggling. The big players are seeing opportunity to bite off some interesting investments and buying the small guys. Maybe we'll also see some mergers between some of the small guys to go and chase after the big ones. So that's the first one. It's interesting to see this continuation of mergers and acquisitions. And another element to that is, as we see the large players acquiring the smaller ones, it creates a new playing field for new startups. So it's actually an interesting dynamic that as the small get acquired by the large, it opens up space for new small fintechs to step in and try something new. And the other one, which I find interesting with this, again, back to what you said, we've been saying for a couple of years now already that the major growth for banking is going to be in the SME space. And it's interesting when you get forward-looking people like us three who sit there and say the future is going to be embedded finance, or the future is going to be SME banking. You have a desire it's going to happen fast. You have like this feeling that it's going to happen. Embedded finance, next year, it's the big apple. And then you sit there halfway through the next year and think, so what's happening? And then suddenly you get this hockey stick. And I feel like we're starting to get that hockey stick now, particularly in the Nordics around the SME space. And part of it's been driven by technology because it's becoming easier to serve SME through using generative AI and other technologies, whereas in the past, it was a very, very expensive segment to serve for a bank, particularly the large banks. So I can understand large banks or large financial institutions going for smaller players to acquire them to step into this space. But what was your view on this article, Ville?
Very similar. I guess market consolidation is inevitable in almost any space where there's a lot of activity, like we have seen in the digital banking space even here in the Nordics. And the scale benefits of basically consolidating different areas of expertise into a single entity is, of course, just makes common sense. The interesting bit here is that we have a lot of these fintechs that have been specialized in lending, whether that's consumer financing or business financing, and now they're finding merger opportunities in the transactional space. So again, mostly focused on the servicing and payments part of the digital ecosystem, and then merging those two together, at least theoretically, should create a very powerful proposition. The second point that occurred to me is that this actually resembles a lot what we've seen with Alisa Bank here in Finland, for instance. We know that this was a combination of several fintechs And now they're also focused on the SME space. And those fintechs also had the specialities, right? So you had the lending part, and then you had the kind of transactional front-end servicing part of the business, and that became Alisa Bank in the end. These mergers are going to be good for the market, I think, overall. Moving from these very small niche segments into the medium-sized space as a fintech also gives you credibility in the market, because your balance sheet is effectively bigger and you have a broader ownership base. So you will also be able to win trust in the markets in that way. So yeah, overall interesting move, and interesting to see these kind of similarities between these mergers.
Yep, agree full-heartedly. And then it comes on to me and what article I picked out. Now, I have a couple of fintechs in the Nordics, in Finland, that I keep my eye on very closely. They're like my little pet fintechs that I really enjoy. And whenever they bring out an announcement, I tend to jump on them. Like we just discussed, Ville, the small bank, Alisa here in Finland is one of them. Another one is Enfuse. I think Enfuse has. We've even had Monica on as a guest, and they've done some fantastic things. I was really hoping that the big news announcement was going to be that they had partnered with Porsche, the car manufacturer, to release the Porsche credit card, but that was not the announcement. I believe that happened earlier, so I cannot rejoice on that, being a Porsche fanatic and a fintech fanatic. Two things coming together, so wonderful, beautiful. But that was not the case. This was slightly different, and I've got the article up here on Finextra, so that I make sure that I get everything correct here. But Enfuse has partnered with Moniz to help in the Belgium and let me read here, in two markets. It was Belgium and another one.
Luxembourg.
Holland, yeah, Luxembourg, that's the one, yes. And the interesting one here is that it's not general normal credit card stuff. Moniz is very much, to a certain degree, as in Finland, e-passi. It's covering the employee benefit space. So that brings up another interesting one for me as well, because we talk a lot about e-passi and the growth of e-passi. Now, in this announcement, the interesting thing is that Enfuse is enabling Moniz to start moving into an open loop employment benefit scheme, which means if we look at e-passi, that's very much a closed loop. The only merchants or partners that you can actually spend your money with, for those in Finland with e-passi, because we have to be a little bit careful here, because e-passi in Sweden is partially open loop, but in Finland it's closed loop. So with Finland, if you've got an e-passi, which most people who've got a job have got, you can only spend your e-passi money with the merchants or the vendors that e-passi has brought on. This deal that Enfuse is doing with Moniz is actually open loop, which means that it works more on the back of the normal credit card rails. So you get, in effect, a credit card through the Moniz app from your employer, and you can then go and spend that money anywhere that a credit card is accepted, within certain limitations, because there are still some scheme limitations and some rules. Now, there is some slight difference between Luxembourg and Belgium because of restrictions in how you can manage the whole element around employee benefits. So in Luxembourg, it's going to be a lot more of an open loop, whereas in Belgium, it's going to be more of a closed loop to align with that. But I think this is really interesting and fantastic news for Enfuse as they continue going forwards. But I also wonder how that's going to play out against e-passi, who is trying to expand into Central Europe as well, to see how that ends up as potentially being a competitive advantage between the two of them. But it also brings me to another element, because I think as we start looking at this, the whole area of employment benefits, I actually think is starting more and more to move into the world of payments and digital wallets. And I've said this before, there's very little remaining for e-passi to start becoming more of a payments capability and a digital wallets capability. The whole notion, I think you and me, Ville, again, one late evening over Christmas discussed this. It doesn't take a lot for e-passi to start getting into the share the cost of the meal situation where I send money to you, because for AirPassy, it is closed loop. Any money I send to you stays within sort of the AirPassy ecosystem. So it becomes a very interesting dynamic there versus, for instance, what Enfuse is doing with monies in Belgium and Luxembourg. But hands off, fantastic, good for Enfuse. And yes, I also want to say fantastic, great news on the Porsche partnership. But with that in mind, what's your view here, Ville?
Couple of things. So first of all, I don't think it's a credit card. So I think it's a prepaid.
No, it's not. It is. It works as a prepaid. So it's exactly the same as the principles of AirPassy. It is a employee benefit card. So the employee will preload it. It's a prepaid card in effect. Yes.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see the how exactly are these open loop cards going to be used on the side of this prepaid scheme that they have in the region with Moniz. Because, I mean, if you compare, for example, the way AirPassy works to how the lunch benefit works in Sweden, for instance. So, I mean, when I worked in Sweden, I had basically had a prepaid MasterCard. And then that prepaid MasterCard, I was able to pay my lunch with that, and the benefits were calculated automatically. But because it was an open loop MasterCard, I was able to use it basically anywhere that was not blacklisted, i.e. places like bars or places where you can buy alcohol or tobacco. Those were blacklisted. But other than that, I was able to use that for pretty much anything. This kind of limitation of what types of points of sale you can use it in is the way that they manage that. Now compare this to the way AirPassy works, for example, here in Finland. They are basically just completely closed loop. So what they do is they onboard all the restaurants and the merchants and the service points where AirPassy is accepted, which allows them to also dictate the fees that the merchants need to pay for this AirPassy to be accepted. Now, turns out that these fees are much higher than they are with debit cards, prepaid cards, or indeed even credit cards, and that makes the AirPassy business model very attractive for AirPassy. Of course, the merchants are taking the short end of the stick of this as well. Again, we'll see how that progresses in the future. But now, because the closed loop is so effective, now we're going to see perhaps these companion cards becoming a thing. So you can actually then use the open loop rails to broader use your balance, and that's an interesting off-ramp for scaling for the likes of AirPassy as well, and we'll see how that plays out in the future. The interesting parallel here from my past as well is the notion of how similar this is to the way mobile money works in Africa, for example. The whole reason why mobile money is so powerful in Africa and why the business is so lucrative for the mobile operators who are operating these schemes is because they're also closed loop. They are very much controlling the merchant fees. They are controlling the on and off ramp fees for people moving money in and out of the mobile money schemes. And they also have launched companion cards with these issuer processors, different kinds of issuer processors like Enfuse. And in the African markets, and that allows them to use the mobile money balance everywhere where MasterCard or Visa is accepted, with certain limitations, of course. But the parallels are very interesting to follow, I would say, because the elements of the market here in the Nordics or in Europe, indeed, in this case, are also quite different, because you can actually spend your money with MasterCard or Visa anywhere, whereas in Africa, those are quite rare, and the acquiring has been mostly done by the mobile operators themselves on the merchant side. But yeah, interesting times again, I would say, for these types of closed loop moving into open loop.
You're absolutely right. And whilst you were talking, I took the opportunity to just validate, as we were both talking about AirPassy in Sweden. I asked one of our generative AI assistants here to give a quick check, and it says that for AirPassy in Sweden, it is absolutely an open loop acceptance model. So it's still following the same model as when you and I worked in Sweden. And I was assumed that's being driven by the tax authority, the authorities and regulators. So AirPassy works slightly differently using the Visa-based card model in Sweden compared to what it's doing here in Finland. But still, I think it's exciting news from Enfuse, and they've been growing like mad over the sort of second half of 2025. So it'll be fantastic to see this continued growth outside of Finland and Nordics for Enfuse going forwards. Janne, what about you? Are you an active user of Airpassi, or more importantly, what do you think to the news of Enfuse exploding onto the global stage?
Yeah, Enfuse definitely doing a great job. I have been using AI Passi, definitely closed loop, and then I have my girlfriend's Edenred on my Vault, so I can get free lunches. But yeah, it's I think generally the employee benefit cards have been more and more visible, of course, or the payment methods. ePassi, of course, has done a tremendous job in Europe and acquiring a lot of other players, but there's still a lot of other activities in the field. Sometimes I've been thinking that maybe this employee benefits, maybe that's just a Trojan horse for ePassi to get into the market, and then they could kind of start to run their own entire payment ecosystem based on that, which is of course kind of a bold move and quite a different approach than these open loop systems have, which are much more universal, of course.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this progresses going forwards. And yet again, it'd be interesting to see how the industry pivots as things change. But that was the end of the news from December, and a look at the newsletter from Helsinki Fintech Farm. As is always the case, we like to have a little bit of fun whilst we are doing our episodes. Ville tends to do it at the beginning. As you know, I tend to do it at the end. And we always get Janne to be our joker when we do our Nordic Fintech highlights. So Janne, as is now tradition, do you happen to have a joke for us?
Yes, I do have a joke, and I want to ruin your year by starting with a crypto joke.
Oh no.
Oh, golly gosh. Go on then.
Yeah. So, what is the difference between traditional farming and yield farming?
I have no idea.
One is real, one is not.
Casinos.
So yeah, in yield farming, instead of growing potatoes, you grow anxiety.
That is also true, yes.
Jokes are always better when they are real. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And also on top of all of this, I believe, Janne, you've got some exciting news for all of our listeners about upcoming events associated with Helsinki Fintech Farm.
Yes, absolutely. So Nordic Fintech highlights, of course, we have the monthly report, we have the podcast, but we want to take it now together with Fintech Farm and Fintech Daydreaming to the next level this year. So our main event on May 21st, the Nordic Fintech Summit, that's the place where all of this comes together. So we have one stage entirely dedicated for Nordic Fintech highlights. So we will invite over all the interesting companies and people and cases which have been showcased in the highlights throughout the year, and we will put them all on same stage, same day, and then of course we will have also Ville and Paul joining us. We'll make an episode and so on. So that's definitely the kind of main event of the year, and everyone should definitely join us in Helsinki if you're a little bit even interested in Nordic fintech and also banking industry, because that's the place to be then.
And we get to do a live episode. I love that. So it's the live audience, and especially if we get some reactions from the audience and get that on tape as well, so to say, it's always good. It brings a different atmosphere.
It does indeed, absolutely. So you heard it here first. If you haven't had enough of Ville and myself and every other episode with Janne, then join us at the FinTech event, and you'll get even more of Ville and myself. And who could ever ask for that? Well, everybody, I hope. Any last words, Ville, from you before we cut off this episode?
No, I think we're like I said many times before, it's going to be a very exciting year. If for nothing else, we get to do the live episode in May. So but other than that, it's going to be a fun year for sure, and looking forward to it.
Any last words from you, Janne?
Please like, comment, and subscribe.
Oh, you took the words right out of my mouth. Now I've got nothing left to say. Oh, gosh. But as Janne said, if you've enjoyed this episode, if you're still with us, and we gratefully thank you if you still are, then please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, leave us a comment. If you found any of the things we discussed today very interesting and you want to continue the discussion, then get engaged on any of the platforms and leave your comments and thoughts, particularly around the digital euro. I think this year is going to be the year where we will really start talking about this, and it'll be fantastic to see some of the misinformation getting washed out so that we can have some real good discussions about the digital euro rather than all of this fear-mongering that's going with it. With that, as I said, hit the subscribe button, hit the share button, share this with one or two of your friends. Ville and I will be back with a guest in 2 weeks' time. Until then, this has been FinTech Daydreaming.
This is FinTech Daydreaming.